Hello, global gardeners. It's Monday. I've been wanting to talk gardening for all week. As cold as it is, I'm not getting out. I'm not seeing some of my gardener friends, and I want to talk about gardening. So let's do that for the next 90 minutes. So great to see you, Andy, who has been educating us a little in Afrikaans. I know that we have a number of South African viewers on this channel. Hello to Jimmy. Great to see you back again. Rob is in the UK. Jay is in Canada. Nan is in Wisconsin. We have people from all over. And Cheryl, hello to you in Maine. I lived in northern Maine. I've mentioned that a few times on this show over the years. Maine is a wonderful state. When you live in northern Maine, you really can't grow much. The season is exceptionally short, but I love it every time we can have somebody in that area of the United States. And it's so nice to see Tony also in the UK, in Wales, from the Simplified Gardening channel. Great to have you here today, Tony. I want to talk about seeds today. And by all means, I would love to hear the tips that you all have. You've heard me before talk about planning your garden, planning your calendar for the gardening season. And I also think it's important to plan for your seeds. Now, the seeds play in with your overall garden plan. You figure out what you're going to grow and what seeds you need. But how much time have you spent actually figuring out where those seeds are going to come from? And once you have those seeds, how are you going to store them? And when it's ready to start growing plants, how are you figuring out your plan for germinating those seeds either indoors or outdoors before they start growing in your garden? So those are some of the things that I want to talk about today. Of course, I'll be throwing out my tips along the way, and I'll be answering your questions along the way as well. So don't be afraid to ask your questions. Always nice to see Yankee Sista, Mike Carrillo, John Jude, Hannah Olson. Hello to you. This is so wonderful that we can all be here in all these different places. And the nice thing as we talk about seeds is whether you are just now starting your season because it's springtime or whether your season is coming to a close because it's autumn, I think every day is a good day to think about seeds. When I plan my garden, I do so with a plan of the plants that will be growing into that realm of seed collecting. Of course, the tomatoes I want to harvest and eat, along with the cucumbers, and I can make my pickles and the squashes for dinner. All of those individual harvests have a purpose. But do you think about taking it beyond the harvest to the seed collecting? So, an example from this year's garden, I have Napa cabbage that's still in my garden. I've cleaned up most of my beds except for the bed that has my Napa cabbage in it. Because for 4 years now, I've been trying to find a variety of Napa cabbage that would do well in my garden. And for the first 3 years, every cabbage I tried to grow bolted very early. That's the problem with my Colorado weather is that it's cool. The cabbages and all those cool season crops grow well. And then literally overnight, it is hot during the day, extremely hot during the day. So most of those kind of plants in my garden will bolt very quickly, usually in June. If I can make it to July, it's quite unusual without those plants bolting. So the Napa cabbages that I'd grown for 3 years always bolted. The harvests weren't that great. And this year, I found a variety of Napa cabbage that did great. It didn't bolt. It grew well. It grew all summer long. I got multiple harvests throughout the summer, even with the hot temperatures. And that cabbage is, as far as I'm concerned, found a permanent part of my garden plan. So, how do I ensure that I have that plan going into the future? I save the seeds. Now, Cabbages are a biennial plant. They need to be in your garden, in the ground for 2 seasons before you can collect seeds. And the cabbage, as part of this 4-year effort, was always to get the seeds of the plants that did well. So I'm leaving those cabbages in the ground over the winter so that next year they'll flower and I'll get the seeds. I do that in the video you saw earlier this year on with onions. Onions are a biennial as well. So when I put my onions in the ground last year, I did so with the intent of saving the seeds this year. And so that's just one aspect of planning for the seeds, because sometimes it's a multi-year process for you to get the seeds from those biennial plants. I also every year save my tomatoes, and I tend to cycle back and forth. So this year I saved my black cherry tomato seeds and I saved my black crim tomato seeds, and I did not save some of the other seeds that I might be going into the future with tomatoes, like the Roma and the San Marzano, because I saved those seeds last year. The plants that I grew this year, including the black crim and the black cherry, were from seeds that I saved 2 years ago. So part of my plan for saving my tomato seeds is alternating. Basically, every 2 years, I'm saving the seeds of the specific tomato plants, and I'll have those seeds for 2 years and then start saving again. Now, tomato seeds will last longer than 2 years, but I'm ensuring that I always have an up to date crop because I'm choosing the seeds from the plants that do best in my garden. And when you do that, when you focus on the best performing plants and save those seeds, then over time, the plants that you get in your garden will continue to outperform all the others. Now, I've still got seeds from black crim that I saved 5 and 6 years ago as a backup. But what I'll be doing is planting 1 or 2 year old seeds to try to get that improvement in my garden, the plants that do best with my weather, with my soil, and with how I take care of plants. So consider that as part of your seed planning and moving forward, because if you have the best seeds, then it's really the best way that you can ensure you'll have success. And Llama Llama is asking the variety of the Napa cabbage. It escaped me as soon as I started talking about the Napa cabbage. I forgot the variety. So I'll try to check the package and do that next week if I can remember to tell you what it is. And it's so nice. Jay and Hannah are talking back and forth with their Swedish. That's so awesome. Sandy's wondering, are there any types of seeds that are not good to collect from the garden? And so I used to say that collecting hybrid seeds was not recommended. And so, as far as the plant types, you can collect any type of seeds that you want within your garden. I would caution you against saving seeds that fall in the noxious weed category. And so, there are a number of decorative plants that gardeners grow all around the world, but they might have become invasive in your area. And so, we have a number of those plants. Russian olive, for instance, is a small tree in my area that is considered an invasive weed. And you're not supposed to grow it. If the county sees it in your yard, they can actually come and cut those trees down. And the landscape plants, there's flowering plants that also fall into that category. I would not recommend saving those seeds that can become invasive and have already been identified on an invasive species list that your city probably has, whether you're aware of it or not. But other than that, even the hybrid seeds, I think, are okay to save because, as I've talked about in recent shows with the land race gardening concept, If you save some of those seeds from hybrid plants and then plant them, you're not going to get a plant that looks like the parent, that original hybrid plant. The seeds are a mystery, a surprise, and actually a bit of an experiment. And if you save those seeds of the plants that the hybrid plant seeds produced, you might actually discover something new, something that does very well in your garden. So, except for those invasive species plants, I now say collect all the seeds you want, including the seeds from hybrid plants, and have fun with it. Just grow what does best in your garden. The concept behind the land race gardening and saving those seeds from plants that you intentionally allow to cross pollinate is because of that concept I was talking about with how I collect my tomato seeds. You choose the plants that match what you want in your garden and that are doing best in your garden. And it doesn't matter if it's a squash that is ugly to look at or doesn't look like anything you've ever seen. If it grows great in your garden and you like the taste, you like the size, and you like all the other aspects of it, then save those seeds and try it again. And eventually you may get a line of squash plants with stable genetics, and you've essentially created a whole new variety that only you have. I just think that's a lot of fun if you take that approach to gardening and move forward with some of those type of experiments and saving the seeds whenever you can. Mike is saying I had a volunteer tomato plant that withstood blight really good, but I didn't save the seeds. Yeah, this is exactly to my point. I've done that many times as well. Grown plants, it's like, wow, that taste was so good. I love that plant. And then I didn't save the seeds and was never able to replicate that particular plant. Plan for it. Have your plan in place so that when these volunteers show up, you already know, based on our conversation today, that you're going to save the seeds and that you're going to put them in your seed saving spot, which is also part of the plan. Seeds should have a dry, cool, dark location for them to be viable for the longest period of time. That's the best way to store seeds. The container is not critical. I prefer glass. I like to use little glass jars, and I've shown this in some of my videos in the past. I like envelopes, paper envelopes, and I have some now that have a little clear plastic window to them so I can see if there are seeds inside and how big the seeds are for my garden planting plan. But any container you have, put your seeds in it. If you have a dark, cool, dry location, that's your seed saving spot. I have a table in my basement. That's where all of my seeds reside right now. And whenever I'm done putting the seeds in the garden, I put them in my little containers and I put them on that table. That way, whenever I'm looking for seeds, I know exactly where to go to find the seeds. And if I don't find the seed packet I'm looking for on that table, it says one of two things. Either I forgot to put the seed packet back and now I don't know where it is, or I've used all those seeds and the seed packet is gone. Having those type of seed saving habits can really make it easy. So when you're out in your garden and on the spur of the moment think, oh, these seeds are ready to harvest, I'm going to collect these seeds. Now you have a plan in place for where those seeds are going to go. And another very important tip, this happened to me this year. I got into that mode with my tomatoes and it's like, oh, all these tomatoes are great. I'm harvesting, I'm putting them on sheets of wax paper and paper towels to dry out. And then I come back a few days later to see how they're doing. And I realize I didn't label every single sheet. And tomato seeds tend to look alike when you have a whole bunch of sheets of tomato seeds. So I had to do it all over again. Silly mistake. I know better. But in the heat of the moment, saving all the seeds, I had my table filled with different types of seeds. I didn't label everything. I figured I would remember that on that particular day I had harvested the seeds from the Berry's Crazy Cherry, along with the seeds from the Black Grim, along with the seeds from the Black Cherry, and laid them out, and I would remember which was which. Well, those of you that, like me, have reached a certain age know that sometimes you don't remember as well as you had hoped you would. So be sure and label everything that you have when you're going to collect the seeds. I've also shown in some videos in what I did this year with my onion seeds in particular. I did it with my cilantro seeds. I did it with my basil seeds. Was I took a paper bag, one of those small lunch bag size, and that's where I collected the seeds. I labeled those bags before I even went outside. So I wrote onions, I wrote basil, I wrote the cilantro on the bag. And then when I went out and collected those seeds, I dropped them straight into the bag. They continued to dry in that paper bag before I put them into their final storage, and they're labeled. So I know exactly what they are. Now, onion seeds look different than cilantro seeds, which look different than the basil seeds. So it wasn't going to be a big problem, but it's still a good habit to get into, to label your containers as you're collecting the seeds. And definitely when you start putting them into that drying phase, know what they are. Since I had those unlabeled seeds, it was no big deal. I still had the plants growing. I went back and just collected more tomatoes, saved more seeds, and it wasn't a big issue. But it is a good way to save yourself some effort. Rafaela Boo Boo is asking, are seeds from a tomato that ripened in a bag as viable as ones from the vine? Possibly. And so the thing about harvesting any type of seed, tomato seeds, pepper seeds, cilantro seeds, if you can allow the fruit or the pod or the flower to completely ripen on the plant, that's best. And so for the tomatoes that I'm planning on saving, I wait until those tomatoes are overripe. And so I'll harvest the tomatoes when they're still firm with just a little bit of give. But the ones that I'm going to save for seeds, I wait until they're downright squishy on the plant, overripe, and then I harvest those. The flowers, I wait until they are brown and dried on the plant before I harvest. The seed pods from the peas and the beans, same thing. Let them dry completely on the plant before I harvest them. That's the best way to ensure that they're going to be viable when you plant them again the next season. If you harvest a tomato, a squash, a pepper after the point, the blush point where it has begun to change color, all of those will continue to change colors. You can harvest a pumpkin when it's still green. Once it's reached that point of starting to change color, it will turn orange, and those green peppers you harvest will turn red off of the plant. It's just no guarantee that the seeds have reached that point of complete viability. So some of them will be, once you've passed that blush point and the fruit is getting into that ripening mode, some of those seeds will be viable, but you're probably not going to get 100% or even 90 or 80% viability. It's probably going to be much, much lower. But to your question, they are viable, but I would say not as viable as those that you leave on the vine to the point that they are fully ripe. Now, if you've got no other option, if you're waiting, and I've done that before with the particularly the big beefsteak tomatoes, my short season that get that early frost, those beefsteak tomatoes have not fully ripened on the vine before I have to harvest them before a frost is coming, and then they ripen on the counter. I've saved some of those seeds and had, maybe 50% germination rates. Some have been viable, but what they do, or what they don't match up to the ones that stay on the vine. So that's the biggest issue that I have as I am moving forward with the time that I choose to collect my seeds. Tony saying, Seed sowing turns a gardener into a master of their garden, free from outside problems. I like that, Tony. Thanks for that. Yeah, that's one of those things that, and that's a great point. You're free from outside issues. A couple years ago, when everything was closed down and so many millions of people got into gardening, seeds were hard to find. They ran out very, very quickly. And if you were just a regular gardener who's been gardening for decades and followed your own schedule, went to buy the seeds, and then they weren't in the store anymore, the nursery didn't have any, that can severely disrupt your garden plan. And I know a lot of gardeners that had that disruption. But if you save the seeds, then you're free from all those outside influences. You're choosing the plants that do best in your garden, and you're not relying on whether the nursery has those seeds available or whether there's going to be that variety that you can find anymore. There are a lot of varieties that gardeners no longer grow because the seed companies no longer sell them, especially the big seed companies. They're focused on a relatively small number of varieties. Now, you can go to the Walmart and see the burpees display, and there are hundreds of seed packets, but it's the same every single year. And when you narrow it down to the tomatoes and the peppers and the squashes, those vegetable plants, there really isn't that big a selection. Maybe 4 or 5, maybe 10 that you might have to choose from. And everybody is growing those same varieties. And so occasionally I have conversations with gardeners who have been doing this for a long time who say they can't find the seeds of some of their favorite plants because they're just not being sold anymore. Saving your seeds is a great way to ensure that you'll always have those varieties and you're not reliant on buying them at the store every year and then finding out that they're not going to be available ever again. So definitely consider that as part of your seed planning. Dusty's saying I need to get better at saving new flower varieties that don't have many seeds. Tend to get careless at labeling. Yeah, it's a good habit to get into, and flowers fall into that same category. I've been talking about the vegetable garden, but the same thing. If you find a flower that does great in your garden, absolutely label it. And I'm also terrible. I'm really good at labeling my vegetable seeds. I'm not as good at labeling my flower seeds. So I know the difference in what the seeds look like between a calendula and an echinacea and an aster and a cosmos. And so when I save them, I'll label the bag as I'm collecting it as Cosmos. I showed a video where I was collecting Cosmos seeds a couple seasons ago and had the bag labeled, but I don't label the specific varieties. And I wish I was better at that. Like you, Dusty, I get careless. It's one of those things where I think I'll remember what the variety is, and then I end up growing 3 or 4 different varieties and just don't know anymore what they are. So I get asked occasionally about some of the flowers that are in the background in my videos, and it's hard to admit that often I don't know the variety of what I'm growing because I just do so much and I get careless. So try to avoid being careless. Sandy's wondering, do you save potatoes to grow next season? Absolutely. In fact, I have some purple fingerling tomatoes now, the Magic Molly that I'm saving. They're actually still in loose soil in a cool spot, and it's too cool for them to germinate. But I want them to stay. I don't want them to get dried out. And so, yeah, absolutely. Those are the only ones I'm saving right now from what I've grown are those purple fingerling because I just love those potatoes. But the biggest issue with the potatoes, and this is another one of those things where I've tried saving a number of different potatoes over the years. And so because my season is so short, it ends earlier than a lot of people's and it doesn't start until later than a lot of people. So I have at least 6 months between the end of my season until the beginning of my season when I can put plants in like potatoes. So when I save potatoes, I have to save a seed potato that's going to last for 6 months before I can put it into the ground again. And what I found is a lot of the varieties of potatoes that I've grown just don't store that long. But when you find one, like I have with those purple potatoes, those are the ones I save because I know that they'll last long enough. If you've got a shorter winter, you don't necessarily have those same limitations. And I highly recommend that you save your potato plant or potato tubers, those seed potatoes to grow next year, as long as you've got the time, short enough time for them in storage. Absolutely. That's a great thing that I highly recommend. And we'll see if Tony adds anything to that because I consider Tony one of the world's experts as far as growing potatoes in your garden. And I'm not sure how many potatoes Tony is saving on a yearly basis before he starts again. But I'm guessing that Tony is saving a lot of potatoes because it's a great way, again, to not be reliant on what you can get at the nursery or the garden center. You're saving what you're growing and what does best in your garden. And to me, that's really a best way to do it. Let's see. Gina's saying my growing season is very long in 10A. Currently trying to grow potatoes all year round. I think they just slow down this time of year, but we'll see. Yeah, one of the things about this time of year, winter in particular for many of us, is that there's just not enough light. And so I've got the lettuce and the kale and the spinach that has germinated in my greenhouse, and it's barely growing because I'm down to about 7 hours of good sunlight a day. And that's not even good sunlight. That's sun that I can see. It's really probably only 4 hours of good sunlight for the plants. So the plants slow down. And even in 10A where your winters aren't that cold, the plants will do okay, but there just might not be enough sun in the northern hemisphere during our winters for you to get the amount of light that the plants need. And they do, they slow down. And that's perfectly normal. You have to have patience. Once the sun increases, the growth of the plants will increase as well. And that's actually kind of fun to see. I used to do that at the school garden in the greenhouse where we would put in the carrot seeds and the beet seeds and the lettuce seeds and the pea seeds, all those that can handle cool weather because it would get cool in the greenhouse. And I'd have the kids sow the seeds typically November, December as part of a lesson. And then the following January, the seeds would only be an inch, maybe 2 inches tall. After a couple months of growing, they were still very short. But beginning usually about the end of February, when the sun was enough for those plants to perform, they'd skyrocket overnight. There would be noticeable growth in those plants. So as long as you're aware of that, you can still grow in the winter. You're just not going to get a lot of big growth. And so Llama's asking, is your climate too cold to leave potatoes in the ground to let them grow naturally the following spring? So I used to think so because my ground freezes solid in winter down to officially in my region, the frost line of the soil I think is 38 inches deep. And so when we bury utility lines that need to be below the frost level, that's about how deep they have to be. My beds, of course, my raised beds freeze solid in the winter. So I used to not leave the potatoes in the ground because they would be frozen, and I figured that would be the death of the potatoes until I started growing more and more potatoes. And even the potatoes in the grow bags that I know were freezing solid during the winter, suddenly in the springtime, and it happened this year. That's one reason why I have purple potatoes this year to save because if you probably don't remember, but earlier this year when I was talking about garden planning, and I mentioned this in a video as well to the live stream, I said I wasn't growing potatoes this year. That was not part of my plan. And then one of those grow bags that I just added more soil to started growing potatoes. After I harvested, apparently I left some very small tubers that I didn't even know were there, too small to even see as I was harvesting. They sat all winter long, they sprouted in the spring, and I had potatoes this year. So, to answer your question, I I do, maybe not intentionally. Now I am doing more of it where the potatoes are staying in the ground either on purpose or on accident, and I'm growing those potatoes that sprout in the following year. And then, like with the purple potatoes that I've intentionally saved now, I will plant those next year as part of my garden plan because they obviously want to grow. That's why I say save the plants that want to grow and do best. I didn't put those potatoes in the ground and they insisted that they were part of my garden this year. So they deserve a permanent place in my garden as I move forward. Hey, Grow Big TV. Nice to see you here. The Grow Big TV channel has already had a couple episodes and some good information. If you remember, they were the guests on the show, Joe and Corky, last week. So nice to have you here, and go check out some of the live streams that they've done on the channel. That's always fun. Nola saying, I have 2 times. How do I select seed tables or seed potatoes? And so just like any plant that you are growing in your vegetable garden or your flower garden, choose them hopefully with an intent of why you're growing them. Now, there's a number of reasons why we grow plants. We grow them because they look good. We grow them because they're easy. We grow them because they're going to produce food that we want to have in our diet. We grow them because we want to save the harvest and preserve it into the winter and then have that food as part of our diet. And we might grow them for the intent of saving the seeds, whether to eat or replant. That's definitely a reason for growing the plants. Potatoes are the same thing. When you are growing your potato or want to grow your potatoes, choose what kind of potato you want. And I love the Yukon Gold. It's a wonderful potato. I love the taste of the Yukon Gold. Russet is extremely easy to grow in my region and gives a good harvest. And I love the look and the taste of the purple Magic Molly potatoes. So when I'm looking to buy potatoes, those are some of my big factors. What's easy to grow and that I can pretty much be guaranteed of a crop. So that's russet. And I grow russet potatoes. What am I really looking forward to eating? Well, the Yukon Gold potatoes. So I grow Yukon Gold potatoes. And what's fun, especially when the grandkids come over and I'm making dinner, the purple potatoes. So I grow the Magic Molly. And if you go back to my video of a couple years ago where I show how I plant the potatoes and grow the potatoes and harvest the potatoes, you'll see that that's what I was growing. I was growing a russet, I was growing a Yukon Gold, and I was growing the Magic Molly. So that's how I select what I'm going to grow. And then I just get online to different companies and see who's having a sale, to see how much they're charging, to see if I can get those 3 in particular that I like to grow at the lowest cost and the most convenient shipping. And especially if it's a smaller family owned company that I can support, that's usually who I make my order from, and then just wait for those seed potatoes to be shipped. And then once I have them, if like the purple ones, they do well, I just save those same potatoes for the following year. If not, if it's a potato that doesn't store for 6 months, then I do the same thing each year and order new seed potatoes. And I experiment a little bit and I'll throw in new varieties from time to time. That's the way I do it, is the varieties that work, the new varieties, and then finding a company that can give me just exactly what I'm looking for, and that fits into my garden plan based on how many of the potatoes that I'm wanting to grow. I was trying to limit what I was growing this year, which is why I didn't have potatoes in my plan. But I think next year they're part of my plan again, just because they didn't want to leave my garden. Thanks, Jay. There's that video I was talking about, how to plant potatoes, the complete guide. So if you're looking and wondering, that's a good video that tells pretty much everything that you're wondering about. Rockstar 1734, hello. I've attempted to overwinter my peppers and removed all the foliage, as many videos instructed. It's been about a month. They already put on a ton of new leaves. Is this a problem? Um, it's one of those problems that it might be a good problem. Uh, it's probably because where you have your peppers, it's too warm, and they might be getting too much light. So if you have them in your kitchen, if you have them in your basement, wherever they are, they're probably in a happy spot that's warm and enough light for them to start putting on all those extra leaves. And so when you overwinter your peppers, if you want them to stay in that semi-dormant stage, they need a cooler spot with less light. So it's not a problem that they're starting to do the growth if you can limit the warmth and the light. They'll grow slowly, and you can either, and I'm assuming they're in some pot right now, some type of container. You can keep them in that container and start growing those pepper plants inside, and it'll just be a bigger plant when you put it outside. You might actually get some flowering on it. Just pluck off those flowers. It's not that big a deal. Or, and you do have to be careful with this, but it's basically what you've already done. You can cut off some of that new growth and try to put it back into that overwintering dormancy mode that you were trying to get into in the first place. So it's not unusual for people that are attempting to overwinter their peppers, for the peppers to put on new growth if they're in a happy spot. Totally up to you. So I'm again one of those let live and let live kind of gardeners, and it's not always matching my original plan, but I've done that before too, where the plant was supposed to be good and quiet and not grow, and then it started growing. And so I say, okay, fine, I'll just put it in a pot under lights in a warm grow spot, and I'll grow my pepper plants indoors and then transplant outside, as opposed to trying to be mean and cut off the leaves and put it in its place and tell it to stay asleep before you put it outside. So a couple different options, but no, I wouldn't say it's a problem. It just is causing you to now have to decide what you're going to do as you move forward. Colorblind Gardener, thank you for that. Gifting 5 Gardener Scott memberships. That's fantastic. Such a generous gift. And I think I mentioned last week, but for those of you that are at the training and collaboration level on the Gardener Scott membership, I'll be doing another members only live stream just after this one today. So thank you, Colorblind Gardener, for being a member and for also gifting those memberships. That's fantastic. And I agree with Grow Big TV. That is absolutely awesome. Bettina's saying very generous. Boothby Gardens is saying thanks. That's fantastic. And so there's, yeah, Colorblind Gardener is asking the members only stream directly after this for the training and the collaborator levels. So thank you so much for that. It's so nice. Yeah, look at you all are such a fantastic group. Everybody offering their thanks for that generous gift. So that's fantastic. And there's Jay again with another video that talks about the how and when to harvest the potatoes. So yeah, I've got a few videos on potatoes, both showing how I grow them in the grow bags, which is my preferred method, and then how I do them in my beds as well. And that's one reason why I like Tony O'Neill's simplified gardening videos on the growing potatoes, because he grows pretty much exclusively in the containers, and he shows every aspect of that. So between my videos and Tony's videos, you'll know everything you need to know about growing in containers. Bud has a question. That's a twist on seed saving. Have you ever used green bean seeds for cooking as a white bean? I have a pound of old seeds. Um, well, I haven't really thought of it as that way, but yes, I have. I have used green bean seeds in cooking, um, just because I would have extra and I would cook them up. I didn't really think of them as a white bean or a red bean or a pinto bean or any of that type of thing. It was just I had beans available to cook. So, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the video I did uh, last year, I think it was, when I took the pinto beans from the store and grew the plants, had a number, and I grew those plants with the intent of growing them to the point that they were dry on the plant, and then saving that second generation of pinto beans so that I can make the video talking about that whole process. Numbers and numbers of people commented that pinto beans are great to eat when they're fresh and to cook them long before they dry on the plant. So any bean seed, you have that option. You can either eat it fresh and enjoy the taste and possibly different color, or leave it on the plant and let it dry and use it later on as a dried bean that you then soak and cook. So I don't do that often, Bud, but yeah, like you, if I've got a pound of old seeds, that is something that can easily be done, and there's no reason to limit it. Mala is poking her head up here from time to time. I don't know if you can see her. She's wondering what I'm doing. It's been days since I just sat like this, so she wants me to go outside. So go on, Mala. Lay down. She'll lay down at my feet here in just a minute. Yeah, Gardens Happen is saying it's surprising what you can grow from the grocery store. Yeah, so I did the video on the pinto beans. I did a video on the sweet potato that I got from the grocery store, and I've got some other videos planned this year as well. Because it's surprising what you can just go to the store and find, and even in your cupboard, like Bud was saying, if in your cupboard are a bunch of old seeds and you don't know what to do with them, go ahead and try germinating them and adding them to your garden. It really is pretty amazing what will grow if you give it time to grow. You might not get great germination rates, but if you were just going to toss old seeds and didn't want to eat them, go ahead and try growing them. It's definitely an option. And so, yeah, it's sunset gazing. It's my supervisor, Mala. You could see her in the corner as she was walking by. She's lying down now. So it's all good. Yeah. And Tony's exactly right. Dried peas are good from the store as well. The thing with the peas, I've found going to like one of our organic supermarkets in particular, where they have the peas in the big plastic bins that you serve yourself and put into a plastic bag and weigh it and take it to the cash register. Those peas tend to be whole, and they tend to be in pretty good shape, and they'll grow well in the garden. If you buy a bag that's made for split pea soup, for instance, well, the reason split pea soup is called split pea soup is because those peas are broken open and they're split. And once they're broken like that, they're not going to germinate. So buying a bag of peas meant for soup is really not the best way to get the peas. But go to your store and get some of those bulk pea seeds. And Tony's exactly right. Those are good from the store as well, and there's no reason why you can't save a lot of money. If you want to do big gardening, I think saving money is a big aspect of our planning for the purchase of the seeds. And you buy a packet of seeds, and the pea seeds, for instance, we'll use this as an example. A packet of pea seeds has probably 4 or 5 dozen seeds, which is a lot of pea plants, but for less than the cost of a packet of seeds. So A packet of seeds might be a few ounces at most of peas because it's a pretty big seed, probably much less than that. But you can get a pound of the dried peas at an organic store for probably just a couple dollars. And that would give you hundreds and hundreds of pea seeds. So if you're really looking to expand a plant in your garden, yeah, sometimes the supermarket that is offering those seeds to eat is instead offering those seeds for you to plant, and definitely can save some big money that way. And then of course, looking to our youth, Rob is using his dried peas in the pea shooters, so that's also a great option. I didn't have it happen with peas. I've had some people tell me that when they were kids they would have pea plants sprouting around their yard because they and their siblings would be doing the pea shooters, and they lived in an area where those peas would end up sprouting in the springtime. So think about that. If you're looking for a fun way to distribute your peas around your garden, shoot them into the ground. That can be a lot of fun. And as long as we can have fun in the garden, we're having a good day. That's the way I always tend to look at it. Shandy's Garden is saying, I've already planted all of my garlic in Ohio. What if I want to plant spring garlic? Can I root germinate more inside before putting them out? Can't have too much garlic. So yeah, absolutely. I actually had planned to do a video this year on spring garlic, and I did exactly that. It's just we had a really weird spring, and the bed that I put the clothes into just they didn't perform, so I never made that video. But you can do a couple different things with that. So you can take some of the garlic that you've planted now and harvest in spring. You're not going to get a big bulb, but you'll get garlic. It'll be the small bulbs, and you can eat those young, fresh green shoots. They're delicious. So that's definitely one option if you want spring garlic or to be harvesting it in spring. Or the other option is to plant it in early spring. As soon as the soil can be worked, go ahead and put the cloves in the ground and they'll start growing. Because they're not exposed to the cold temperatures of winter, they're not going to develop the big bulb, but you can harvest them at any point. So you can plant the garlic in early spring and then harvest it in June or July or August and treat it like you would a green onion, where you would eat the whole plant. It just now is going to taste like garlic instead of tasting like onion. So uh, those I prefer to put garlic directly into the ground, either in the fall to harvest early or in the spring to harvest more like a green onion. But yes, you can germinate it inside and then transplant it outside. There's just going to be a delay. Anytime you transplant, it's going to put stress on the plant, and there's going to be a few weeks where it doesn't grow, and maybe the outer leaves might dry and fall off, and so that will limit how well the plant does as well. So that is an option. But if you've got the bulbs, it's kind of like the potatoes. If your winter is short enough, the garlic will store longer, especially the soft neck varieties, and you can save the clove inside over the winter to do that spring planting. And so lots of different options here. I'd say try a few different ways and see which you like best as far as harvesting early, planting early, and then also doing some transplanting. And you may be surprised at what you find when it comes to the garlic growing. It's such a resilient plant, such a sturdy plant that it can take a lot of stress and abuse if you want to transplant it. So it could be worth the effort if it's something new that you want to try. So long to you, Tony. I see that you have to leave for work. Hope you have a good, safe day at work, and we'll chat with you later. Thanks for dropping by. Okay, let's go on, see what else we have. Let me mention a couple other aspects about the seed plan that I was talking about. Now, One of the things I showed in a video, I think it was the beginning of this year, when I talked about planning your garden, was to actually take the seed packets that you have and organize them in such a way that they match with your planting plan. And so that's an easy way for me when the weather finally improves and it's a good day and I'm ready to plant. I can just grab a bundle of seeds that have already been paired with the bed that they're going into, and I know roughly, based on my garden plan, when I'm going to put those seeds in the ground. And I'm just waiting for that good day, for the weather to be right, for the soil to be warm enough. And I've already organized the seed packets going into that bed ahead of time. And you can do that as early as you want when it comes to putting your plants into the beds, your seeds in particular. Spend time now when your garden is dormant. My garden right now is covered with snow. We had snow over the weekend, and that doesn't mean I can't get outside and see what's going on in my garden and use this time for some planning and figure out that in each bed, I'm going to be putting the specific types of plants. Then coming back to my table where I have all my seed packets ready to go and grouping them so that come March or April or May, whenever it is, I'm going to be putting the seeds, they're small as head, that I just grab that seed packet and carry it outside. So I I prefer to take that time in advance to make it easy, because especially for those of us with the weird weather, I can put on my calendar that I want to sow my spinach and my peas and my lettuce and my radishes in the first week of April. But if I've got a big snowstorm rolling through in that first week of April, I'm not getting those seeds in, but they're ready to go. And so if the second week of April is good and the weather is cooperating, it's okay. I grab the same packet and I just shift it by 1 week, and now I put all those seeds in the ground. But that preparation was done in December or January or February, long before they actually went into the garden. So totally up to you, but I think, that the gardening bug has bit me, and if I don't get that opportunity to do something with my gardening bug, then I start going a little crazy. So I spend the cold months of winter doing those kind of things, preparing for all those activities that I'm going to be doing in the springtime. Mountains and Mayhem is wondering, I have seed garlic I forgot to plant in October. Do you think I could plant them in starter pots for a few weeks, then transfer into the garden a little later? This is one of those things you could, but one of the reasons why we're putting our garlic in the ground now in the October, November timeframe is because we want some root development. We actually want those cloves to start sending out roots. And if our timing is right, the roots are growing and we're not getting the sprout when the cold weather comes. So those cloves are sitting in the ground with some root development, with no plant growth, waiting for the soil to warm up in spring. And because the roots are already there, and because all that energy is in that clove, when the soil warms, it starts growing and more roots develop, and then you get all of those leaves that start growing. Well, if you do that now indoors and in the starter pots, you're going to get some of that root development. But then if you transplant them in a few weeks into your garden, you're going to be breaking off those roots, damaging those roots, stressing the plant. That I think for the most part means you've wasted the few weeks. I would say go ahead and put them out now. And if what it's going to be cold, so you're not going to get as much root development as you would indoors, but you're going to get some root development, especially if you can cover that bed with plastic and maybe mulch to help keep the soil temperature a little bit warmer. You'll get some of that development. So it's a trade-off. Yes, we want the root development. You can get that in the seed starter pot, If you plant the whole pot, if like you're using a peat pot, then that would be the way I would recommend. But if you were taking it out of the pot and then transplanting it, that potential root damage could undo all of that effort. And I would probably caution against doing that. So it's a balance. There are other considerations. Of course, how cold it's been, how cold your soil is, if the soil is frozen or not. There aren't many of us that have frozen soil yet. So even though it might be late, I'd say it's not too late to get garlic in the ground. Just consider adding some extra protection to help keep the soil warmer for a little bit longer before the really freezing temperatures set in and all growth stops in those cloves. So Mala wants to spend a lot of time with me today. I told her I was going to be taking a while that we were talking. So it's what you have when you have a young dog that just has so much energy and wants to always be outside. She's so much fun. I did some filming of her yesterday running around in the snow just because I like to watch some of that from time to time. And she's such a fun dog to get my energy going, get me outside. It's so much fun. This dog. So if you don't have a dog, if you are a dog person, garden dog is definitely the way to go. I've had a garden dog now for 30 years. And when my kids weren't helping in the garden, my dogs were helping in the garden. So it's a great way to not be alone and to have someone else giving you a hand. Even though it's not always a helpful hand, it's always a lot of fun in the meantime, I tend to think. And Gardens Happen says my dog just came up to me with one of her toys. So there you go. That's the way it goes. So let's go ahead and talk quickly about the background today. This comes from our friend. I haven't seen her on today. Wasabi Gal sent this picture. And we've looked at Wasabi Gal's garden in the past. I think at the beginning of this year had a picture when everything was barren and it was a garden picture. I love the garden pictures, but this is from a few weeks back. You can see the tree leaves are starting to change color. You can see some of the other leaves in the garden are starting to yellow, but this is what I like to call the classic garden, where you've got the garden shed, you've got the tree, you've got the brick area in the middle of the garden that you can put some seats and spend some time eating lunch outside, or maybe at sunset as the insects and the birds start returning to the garden. I love spots like that. And then you can see all the different methods. There's the low raised beds. You can see the hoop that's over the bed that has the climbing plants. You've got the small greenhouse or hoop house that's in the background. You can see lots of small plants and trees that are growing along the garden shed. And this is the way I like to garden, and that I often refer to in my videos and when we talk about these backgrounds as well. When I put my garden plan together and when I build my gardens, this is what I do. I build all of these different components, all these different spaces in the garden, and look at it as much more than just a bed to grow vegetables in, or a spot that you're going to have for food. I think a garden can be much more. So when you see some of the flowers and the shrubs and the trees, and there's pots, looks like pots just in their side of the brick with herbs growing in it. I encourage that kind of gardening. I really encourage all these different pieces and the different components. Maybe not all at once. For new gardeners in particular, I always say start small with just a bed or two of whatever it is you want to grow. But as you expand and as you want your garden space to be something that is welcoming to you, that you really want to go to, think about some of these things, that brick center piece and the different types of plants, and of course, the shed that you can store all of your tools in and whatever else you need in there. So I really like the garden that Wasabi Gal has because it just looks really welcoming and it looks like it's been here for a while. Whether it's brand new or not, it looks like it's been tended to by someone who's been gardening for a while. And I really like that. And totally bohemian herbology, so many layers of visual interest. And that's really a good way of saying it. That really summarizes what I've been saying is that it really is good to look at. So thank you for sharing that. Now let's see. Llama is talking to Brian about the good videos on seed catalogs you're looking at. So I'm glad you mentioned that because that was also on my list of things I wanted to talk about. And actually, the reason why I chose this subject today, because this week I ordered my Baker Creek seed catalog. And there's been a couple others that I've also ordered as well. So I completely agree with Llama that I I do have the videos on seed catalogs. In fact, some of my earliest videos from uh, let's see, that would have been like 5 or 6 years ago. I've got a video on seed catalogs and many more that have been updated since then. It becomes addictive, which is why every year I'm ordering seed catalogs. I'm going to really try, I said this last year, but this year I'm really going to try and cut back on the amount of seeds I buy. But there's always something new, something I got to try. And the best way to do that is with the seed catalogs. You can go to the big box stores and look at those seed displays. And like I said earlier, get the same seeds every year that everybody else is getting. But if you want to try some of those new things, if you want to try to find those seed potatoes that match exactly what it is you're looking for, if you want to find the fruits and the vegetables that will give you exactly what you want to add to your diet, I think the best way to do that is through the seed catalogs, either an online electronic catalog, or I still like the paper catalogs that get sent in the mail and then I can sit in my chair and peruse at my leisure. So start looking at that. And most of the seed companies have free catalogs. You just go to their site and sign up and they'll send it to you. And so this week, Baker Creek has started announcing that their catalog is ready to order. They're not going to send it yet, but you can order the catalog. And most of the seed companies are in that mode right now in November and early December, where you can order the catalog and then they'll start shipping in December and January. And it's so fun. There are days that I'll get 3 or 4 catalogs in the mail in that one day. Oh, that's like Christmas. It's like a birthday where you get all these presents and now can go sit and peruse and try to figure out what you're going to be adding to your garden. But it can be addictive. I do like to support the companies that I order from. And so typically, even if it's a small order, if they send me a catalog, I'll probably order from them. And that's one reason why they send free catalogs, because a lot of people are in the same mode that, well, you sent me a catalog, so I've got to order from you. So totally up to you as to how receptive you are. But they're also educational. I've made videos about that as well. I have a video on one of the best ways to learn gardening is actually through the seed catalogs, because there's some really good catalogs out there that really strive to provide good gardening information. And so you can learn about gardening in a seed catalog as as much or more than you can just choosing the varieties that you're going to order. So great time of year to add that to your plan for getting your seeds. Get your catalogs. And I've got dozens and dozens of catalogs. The good ones, those that have really good information, I save them as reference guides and add them to my library, just like all the books I have, the gardening books in my library. I've got some seed catalogs in my library that are great with really good information. And so, some of them like Territorial Seed and Johnny's Seed. Those are some that I like to get great information that they added there. Prairie Moon Nursery is great for uh, the native plants that you might be growing. So just go nuts and order some seed catalogs and see what happens as you get into that mode and decide that you want to fall prey to that tactic that the seed companies are using, knowing that you're going to order more. So shout out to Cheryl McNaughton. Thank you, Cheryl, a new member at the training level. I hope you have time after this to join us in the live stream. And you can go to the Gardner Scott channel page and you'll see comments that go out to the members, and there'll be a link to the live stream after this one. So nice to see you here, Cheryl. Always nice. Yeah, there's Jay on top of things. There's my video on how to learn gardening from seed catalogs. And it really is great. I've given seed catalogs. I'll do that at my garden club. And one of the reasons I do it is because there was another member that started doing it. And I thought, what a great idea. Why didn't I think about that? And that's what he did, is he would bring his old seed catalogs to give to the new gardeners in our gardening club. And so I started doing the same thing, taking my catalogs that had the really good information and giving them away, partly so that they could see seeds they might want to order, but especially for the new gardeners that needed some answers. I would give them those seed catalogs that had great answers to questions you didn't even know you needed to ask. The seed catalogs have a lot of that good information. And Shandy's saying Stark Brothers for fruits and berry bushes and trees. Yeah, I've ordered from Stark Brothers for a number of years. I like Stark Brothers. For education, I like Fedco. I've mentioned them before. The Fedco catalog, it's just a black and white paper catalog, but the information in there about rootstock and the history of the varieties. Fedco is great. They're a Maine company. They have great information in their catalog if you're looking to grow fruit trees or fruit bushes, and or trees of all different types. That their fruit and tree catalog is packed with information, and I really consider that a good source as well. Bud says, I just pulled out my collection of seed catalogs from last year because I can't wait for the new ones to start my planting. And that's a good point, Bud. I completely agree. And that's why I had catalogs on my mind, is because as I was looking to figure out what I was going to order, I pulled out some old catalogs and started thinking about what I'm going to grow this year based on the catalogs. Because I'll usually, and I've mentioned this in a video or two, I'll dog ear the pages of the plants that I'm interested in. And as I've mentioned before, my plan evolves over time. So I'll get the seed catalog, I'll dog ear the pages of the plants I'm interested in. And when I do that with 6 or 7 or 8 or more catalogs, there's a lot to choose from. And then I put my plan together. And then now, this time of year, it's a great idea, like Bud says. I go back to those catalogs from last year that I had dog-eared the pages, and I didn't grow a lot of those plants because I just didn't have the room, or my plan shifted in another direction. So sometimes revisiting a previous year's ideas is a good way to get your garden planning started for the next year. And so, yeah, I've got stacks of catalogs from last year and year before, and it can be a really good starting point for your planning. And then, of course, you order the new ones just to see what new plants are also popping out, and you decide you want to try. Shandy's Garden says that Baker's Creek has both a free and 2 purchase versions. And so, yeah, Baker's Creek has, I did a video a couple years ago where I visited Baker's Creek, and I got to do a real good behind the scenes visit with them. And so at any given time, they have 900 to 1,000 varieties of seeds that they sell. And you can find all of them on their website, but it does take some searching. And so they've got two catalogs. They've got the one catalog that's free, and I think it has typically 200 to 300 of the varieties that they're highlighting for sale in any given year. But if you want to see their complete collection and get some of that really helpful information, they have another catalog that is like a book, much thicker, and they do sell that. That is one for purchase because it's much more extensive with what's in it, and it's not just seeds. There's a lot more. So if you're looking to ask for a present to be given to you, yeah, the Baker Creek Purchase Catalog is a nice gift to get, and I would encourage that you consider that if you like Baker Creek as a seed company. Gregory's asking, can you grow lima beans in your garden in Colorado Springs? Good question, and yes. Now, broad beans is a category of seed that I've seen many videos on. The UK grows a lot of broad beans, and so lima beans kind of fall into that broad bean category. And I can grow them here. I've tried growing them here, but in this part of Colorado, it's 7,000 feet elevation. With the short season I have, they just don't do as well as other types of beans. So you can grow lima beans and other broad beans here in Colorado Springs, but it's a challenge. And so I no longer do it just because it's too much work. Remember, I said earlier that you choose the reasons why you grow what you do and the reasons you choose to select your seeds. Well, for me, ease is a big reason for growing the plants. The ones that are easy to grow in my garden, I'm more likely to grow. And lima beans don't fall into that category. So I do know people that grow them and have some success, but I honestly don't know many gardeners in my area that are growing broad beans because they've had similar results. It can be a little challenging. So it one of the ways I know that is because I tried it. And so even though I say it's challenging, and I've said this many times to all of you, don't let someone else tell you what to grow or what not to grow. Now, it's a guideline that I'm presenting here in Colorado. I and many of the gardeners I know have had difficulty growing those kind of plants. But if you want to grow them and you're in the same area or a similar area, go for it. Grow them. See what your success is. And if, like me, you discover that it's too much work, then you just don't grow them again. But you may discover that there's an area in your garden that they do great in, or you cover them with a row cover to keep the insects away and to add a little bit of extra heat, and they do great. So try it. And I think that's one of those things that too many gardeners don't do enough of, which is to garden anticipating you're going to have failure. Garden for the purpose of finding out how bad it's going to be. You've heard it's not going to work. So if it doesn't work, you really haven't lost anything. You knew it wasn't going to work in the first place. So you try it. And if you find out, yes, it really didn't work, hopefully you've learned a lot as part of that process to discover why it didn't work. But you might surprise yourself and you might surprise all the others as well. And you might actually have success where everybody else had failure. So the broad beans kind of fall in that category of plants that I'm not planning on doing again. I may try again, but I would definitely say do it and then find out what happens. Gregory's saying Vermont Bean Seed Company has a nice catalog. I agree. I honestly have not ordered much from Vermont Bean Seed in years past, but I have got their catalog and definitely do like the catalog. So a lot of good catalogs out there and a lot of things that I like to read. I like to read books, and the seed catalogs really are a great way to treat it like you're just sitting down with a good friend reading, the story that's going to come out of those pages. Colorblind Gardener says microclimates are a big thing in Southeast Virginia and still have tomatoes and peppers producing. Good for you. Fruit is taking longer to ripen, but new ripe fruit since everyone else took their plants out. Yeah, and that gets back to that sun I was talking about. As the sunlight decreases, it's going to take longer for the fruit to ripen. But that's wonderful to have the peppers and tomatoes in at the end of November. I'm a bit envious of you. I think that's fantastic. Take full advantage of it. And especially when everyone else has ripped it out. This is one of those things, like I was just talking about. If you move to an area and everybody says, "Oh yeah, in the end of October, you'd rip out all your tomato plants." Well, one year, leave them in the ground and see what happens. And especially in Southeast Virginia, you may find out everyone else has ripped out the plants. Maybe they told you you should have ripped out your plants and you didn't do it, and you're enjoying the harvest. That's the best way to garden. Figure out what works for you in your specific space. And that's the way to continue doing. Don't listen to anyone when they tell them what you should and shouldn't do. You got to do what works for you. And that's the way I garden. I do a lot of things in my garden that others might not agree with in my area, but I think it's fantastic that it's working for me. So I'll keep doing it. And I keep enjoying it. The tomatoes, that's one reason why I don't rotate my crops. Now I do rotate different crops in different beds, primarily to try to find the best spot. But I've got one bed in particular, and you can see it in the last 3 years of videos I've made. Every year I grow tomatoes in that bed because the tomatoes in that bed just tend to do better than the tomatoes in any other spot in my garden. So I amend the soil every year. I make sure that each year the soil has as many nutrients going into the season so that those plants will do well. But I've got one bed right in the middle of my vegetable garden beds that I always grow tomatoes in because I found it works. And I've seen all the same videos that probably some of you have seen that say you've got to rotate your crops. You're going to deplete the soil. The pests are going to come in. Well, no, if you are focused on your soil and have healthy soil, you can keep growing the same crop in the same bed year after year, and they're not going to be attacked by pests, and you're going to get great harvests. And that's what I do. And I've got other plants in other areas that I do the same thing with. So I'll suggest my way of doing it, and it's up to you to decide whether that's best for you. But you've got to figure it out, and you got to try it, and you got to see if it works or not, and then you move on from there. That's one of the things I like about gardening so much is that we can figure out what is going to work best for us, and then go from there as well, and in our planning for the future. Wesley is wondering, I live in Florida and don't overwinter my pepper plants. Do you foresee any consequences? I don't know. It depends on the winter weather you get in Florida. Now, pepper plants are very, very strong and sturdy and can handle a lot of abuse. And even if they're exposed to freezing conditions, it might not be enough to kill them. So a pepper plant that is exposed to frost and freeze will probably lose its leaves, but the plant itself, as long as the soil doesn't freeze, the plant will still survive. And so, depending on where you are in Florida and whether you get freezes or not, it probably isn't a chance for consequences ahead. But if you see a frost coming, or particularly a freeze, just cover up the pepper plants. Go out there, and if you've got those big black buckets from the nursery that trees and shrubs come in, throw one of those big black buckets over your pepper plant when that cold weather is coming, and that'll be enough to protect it through that night. If it's going to be a stretch of a few days with cold weather, then throw some plastic tarps over the plants going into the evening. Do the same thing. Put that bucket over the plant so you don't break the plant, and then throw a tarp over it to help hold the heat in. And that's a good way to get through those cold stretches. The leaves may fall off. They'll have to grow again. It's the same thing like we talked at the beginning of the show with overwintering peppers indoors. When you prune off all those leaves and you really stress the plant to the point that you want it to stop growing, if it's warm enough, the soil in particular, and there's enough light, it's going to bounce back and grow fine. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, Wesley. Just be aware that you may need to add some protection to those plants if you get some of those days where it starts dipping. So basically, when the orange growers are having to protect their trees, that's the same time you need to be protecting your pepper plants in Florida. Colorado Bird Nerd, hello to you. Always nice to have you here on Mondays. Thank you for that contribution. My first year saving some seeds. Excited to see how they do next spring. Learned so much from you and everyone here. Thank you. You are so welcome. Positively, absolutely, extremely welcome. So I'm so glad that you're doing that. The saving seeds, like growing plants, does take time to learn what you need to learn. So I hope you have a highly successful first year saving your seeds, but recognize that there are things that could go wrong, may not go as well as you hope, and just be aware of that. Particularly with the saving. So one of the biggest issues I've had, I don't know if you've had this particular issue, but the seeds need to be dry to put them into storage. And so for first year savers, that's probably the biggest issue I see is that they put their seeds into a glass jar or they put their seeds into a paper envelope before they're completely dry. And then they come back a couple months later and the seeds have mold and they've started rotting because they were still wet when they were put into storage. So spend that extra time. The seed table I was telling you about, all of those sheets of seeds have not been put into containers yet. I've saved some of those seeds 6 weeks ago, almost 8 weeks ago, and they're still on those sheets drying. My indoor air is pretty dry here in Colorado, so you might have to make some adjustment if you live in a really humid region. But just leave the seeds out in the air to dry for weeks and weeks before you actually put them into the container for longer term storage, and you'll have much better success. That's the biggest issue that I've seen with first year savers. So I'm hoping that you were aware of that and have made corrections for it. And I hope it is successful. You'll have to give us an update because we'll definitely be talking seeds again in the springtime. Bowtie Life, I hope we've given you a lift today here in Destin, Florida during last year's freeze, 18 degrees Fahrenheit. And so let's see, 18 degrees Fahrenheit is about -8 Celsius. All my pepper plants died back to the ground, but nearly every one of them came back strong. There you go. That's exactly it. The soil temperature is so critical for most of these plants that we're growing, not the air temperature. And we look at the air temperature as the thing we can measure and that we track and that the forecaster gives us on the nightly news. But it's really the ground temperature that is the biggest issue. And so in Florida, because it's so warm for so long during the winter, the ground never freezes. The air might freeze, but the ground doesn't freeze. And so those roots are going to stay alive. And while the leaves are going to fall off and some of the branches might be damaged, the plant is still alive. So thank you for mentioning that, because that's how it works. And you obviously have the experience to see that it's not that big a concern if you forget to cover them. I like to cover them just to minimize the damage. But you're right, they will bounce back. It's such a hardy plant. I've actually seen that here in my garden. That I did the video a few weeks ago measuring those severe cold temperatures that I've had. I've had some days like that in the past where my forecast was calling for some extremely low temperatures like that. And I went ahead and harvested all my peppers and harvested all my tomatoes. The cold came And then the roller coaster weather here in Colorado, it's going to warm back up again. And just last week, we had temperatures close to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 21 Celsius after those extreme cold. And in years past, my pepper plants did not get killed in that extreme cold, and they did try to come back. But my winter's just too long, and then the ground freezes, it gets too cold, and then the pepper plants die. So that's where the overwintering plan comes into place if you do want to try to save them. Colorblind gardener, another one of our members. You can also use a dehumidifier to help dry seeds, or a dehydrator if you have one with a very low or no heat setting. Alton Brown has a cheap dehydrator built with a couple filters and a box fan. I love Alton Brown and some of his projects, and I've seen that video where he takes the box fan and makes a very simple dehydrator. And absolutely, get that airflow across the seeds. If you use a dehydrator, absolutely the lowest setting to dry it out or to dry the seeds out. But you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. That is an option if you live in one of those areas with high humidity to help get the seeds dry. And it's similar to, like, if you were dehydrating, you could do it in your oven. Turn on your oven, let it warm up, and then turn off the oven and wait a little bit of time, like with the oven door open. But while it's still warm inside, put the seeds in the oven, close the door, and let them sit overnight. They're not cooking, they're not baking, they're just in a warm place. And that's often enough to help dry out the seeds as well. So some really good points there. Bud says, your point about soil temp is so important. Since I put a soil temperature sensor in my raised beds, I've learned so much. Good for you. I'm glad you've done that. And that may be because of what I've said. I don't know or not. I did a video earlier this year where I talked about that, and I've mentioned it in the live stream as well. This year, because of the videos I was making with Eli and Kate, I planted some of my tomato plants in that bed that I saved for my tomatoes early, just so I could make a video earlier than I wanted to. The soil was still too cool, and it was so clear. The plants that I waited another 3 weeks to plant, but when the soil temperature had warmed, those plants did so much better than the plants that I put in early when the soil was still too cool. So yeah, you're exactly right. It's so important. And you don't need a fancy temperature probe. They do make specific probes for the soil. I have a couple of those. And if you're looking for gift ideas, soil temperature probes, add it to your list. It really can make a difference when the weather starts warming and you're trying to decide whether to put plants in the ground or not. Look at some of the videos I've made and get that soil probe out and see what your soil temperature is, and that can have an influence. You may remember me saying that this year the soil temperature in my garden on the first day of summer was cooler than it was on the first day of spring. We had such a cold June that the soil that had warmed up in May cooled down in June because it was just overcast and cold and rainy for the first couple of weeks in June. I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't put the soil probe in and recognized that it was cold in the soil, and that's why I needed to delay my planting. So add that to your list of things you want to do. And I started with exactly the same way as Shandy's garden, just using a digital meat thermometer. And I think I've got a video from probably 5 years ago. I don't remember the video being about the soil temperature, but I was talking about measuring the soil. And that's exactly what I used. Actually, the video is older than that. And I used a meat thermometer to do my soil temperature. So yeah, LOL, but no, it's serious. That's definitely a way to get in there and check your soil temperature and know the right time to be putting your plants in the ground. And Colorblind Gardener has a thermal camera. When the first freeze hit, the ground was 20 degrees Fahrenheit. which is about -6 Celsius. And the raised bed was still 55 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 13 Celsius. So yeah, that's a great experiment. I haven't done that. I have a infrared thermometer. I'm going to have to do that. So I did that with the probe to see the difference in in the beds and the in-ground beds in particular. But that's good. Thank you for sharing that, because there can be a big difference between our beds. And that's one reason why I suggest hoops and plastics, particularly in the raised beds. They can gain an extra week or two or more in your gardening season because of those kind of differences. So wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That's always nice. Uh, Betty is saying, I was thinking the only thermometer I have is Vicks, and does the ground have a fever? So that, yeah, there, some of those thermometers, like the people thermometers, don't work as well, but the probe thermometers definitely do. So that's funny. It's always a good way to look at it. So start thinking about your seeds and the ones you have and the ones you don't have, the ones that need to be stored, the ones that need to be bought, the ones that maybe you can plan to save next year as you're putting your garden together. If you're just starting your garden now, start thinking about those plants that you might have thought you were going to rip out, but now maybe you can leave in so that you can save some of those seeds for the following year. So it's that long-term approach to gardening. Gardening is more than just this season. I think gardening is for a lifetime, and how we approach our lifetime starts with today. So the seeds are the topic of the day. I hope you can get a good start on your season and start thinking about what you're going to do with the seeds and some of these tips. I hope they've helped. I'm going to be back next Monday doing the same thing. We'll have a topic to help you get along with your planning moving into the cold months or the start of your season. And so I hope to see you here next Monday. Always a pleasure. You all are so wonderful. My week has started great. I'll see you then. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.